And hi, I'm Siobhan Haddleton. I'm the ASD resource base lead at Bilsley Primary School, and I also work as an expert teacher for the Elliott Foundation, offering support for their teaching staff and SLT around working with children with autism and other SEND needs.
So we are a research school, and we have been a research school now since July 2019. So the research school is a collaboration between the EF and the IEE, which is explained there. And it supports schools to use evidence to inform teaching and learning. And so hopefully it brings research closer to schools where that actual implementation is taking place. So I'm just going to show on the next slide, just to explain this a little bit further of how we hope this happens and how we implement that evidence. Is we take that public knowledge at the top there in the diagram, and we add it with our practitioner knowledge. So that's along with the experience we all have as practitioners. And then we put it together, we implement it, and we review it. And it's a continuous process. Okay, so it's always being reviewed. So hopefully what you'll see later on, we'll come back to this diagram and put it into practice. But it's just showing how we use that research to improve our practice continually. So today's deep dive into research, just so you know what the focus is it's what the research says, what's happening currently and how successful it is in your schools, and hopefully time for you to think about what's next, what's your next steps. We might be able to help support you with that. So just to quote here from the DFE, which I quite like, you know, we're all here because obviously we believe in children with SEND, and we want to support them to the best of our ability. But obviously the other thing we want to do is we want to spread that passion, and we want to ensure that all teachers are teachers of pupils with SEND. So I'm just going to show you this diagram, which I particularly like. Now, this is in the EEF guidance for SEND, so you can get it and use it. So this diagram highlights that special education needs are not something that the pupil needs to change about themselves. It's rather that school needs to consider how to change the quality of what's happening in the immediate environment to best support the pupil's learning, taking into account the individual, the home, the wider community, and time. So if we look at the top there, we see time, and we think about our pupils. We can think that pupils' development's not linear. They all grow at different, and their patterns of development are all very individual. Their complexity for special needs may change as they age, and some pupils might not have SEND as they grow up. It might be something that's developmental delay at the beginning of their education time. We've also got the environment there, which is an influential factor. And when we talk about the environment here, we're referring to the activities that pupils take part in and the interaction they have with staff and other pupils. And then we've got the children and their personal characteristics, and how pupils have different personal characteristics that lend them to react differently to the same environment. So we need to take all that into consideration into that influence for development and for our outcomes. So what I like about that diagram is it just highlights that, yes, we can look at a group of pupils with SEND, but it's also about those individual strategies, isn't it? And hopefully we'll be able to help you further with that through our discussion today. All right, and I'm going to move to Siobhan, so I'm just going to turn off my volume.
Okay, so we need to have a think, obviously, not only about the pupils that we've been working with pre our current situation and pre the pandemic, but it's also important as we're working now to really think about the current context that we're in, and how we can help support our children with SEND. because we know that around 1 million children across primary and secondary education have been at home. That's since March 2020. And lots of those have not been able to access much of the education and lessons that they would normally if they were in school. That said, there's also been some evidence and some research that has shown that actually the access to home learning that's been provided has given our children with SEND a richer engagement in those academic subjects, but also things that aren't necessarily the core subjects in a space where the environment has actually enabled them to access and engage with their learning better than they would do if they were in school. So with all that in mind, we're going to have a look through the EEF's guidance report on working with children with special educational needs, and this is within mainstream schools. We're going to look at that with a kind of open mind in both primary and secondary schools, and this document is for both primary and secondary education, as well as those in the early years. So although Sarah and I's experience is mainly in primary school, this documentation is for all year groups. You can download it as a PDF on the EEF website, and then you can obviously print it or just use it as an e-copy if you'd, whichever one works for you. So the EEF guidance is always broken down into a number of recommendations, and the SEND guidance is broken down into these 5 recommendations. So what we're going to do is break these down a bit further and just pull out for you some of the key information and findings that we've looked at when looking at this research and guidance report ourselves, and also to point you in the direction of some of the things that we've used within our own school setting, or some of the things that colleagues have recommended to us when we've worked with other research schools on other projects. So you can see then that there are 5 recommendations. The first one is about creating a positive and supportive environment, and that's without exception. So obviously for children in this context with SEND, but for all children and all pupils. The second one is about building an ongoing and holistic understanding of your pupils and their needs. The third, to ensure that all pupils have the access to high quality teaching. The fourth one, to complement our high quality teaching with carefully selected interventions. And the fifth one, working with teaching assistants effectively. So we're going to have a look at those as we go. But again, this is all looking at research that can influence and improve our provisions within mainstream schools. So as we talk about this, really reflect on how these could be adapted or changed to work within your mainstream provisions. So the first one is about creating that positive and supportive environment. And you can see here that the guidance says that explicitly prompting, modelling and reinforcing positive behaviours, teachers and other support staff can proactively support behaviour. And this enables our pupils to learn, pay attention and persevere with a difficult task. And what we'd like to play for you now, technology allowing, is a case study from one of our teachers who's working with one of her pupils, a Year 5 girl with a diagnosis of ASD, and how she has worked with the pupil and with staff to create a really holistic approach to enable that pupil to really thrive and achieve in our school.
I'm Laura Butler. I'm a teacher at Billsley Primary School. I'm going to present a brief case study to exemplify Recommendation 1 from the SEND guidance around creating a positive and supportive environment for all pupils without exception. The case study today is around a girl who is on the autism spectrum. She's a range of social and emotional learning needs. She's really struggled with her behavior in the past. And at the moment, she's also undergoing some health concerns, which have kept her out of school quite a bit. And when she does come into school, she can be quite tired and she can fall asleep in class. But we have really sought to develop positive relationships with her. Every morning when she arrives at school, she's greeted on the playground like everyone else by a member of our senior leadership team.
Yeah.
You're going to go back, play it again.
Hey.
Try and play again.
Yeah.
Do you want to repeat it off?
Yeah.
I'm Laura Butler. I'm a teacher at Billsley Primary School. I'm going to present a brief case study to exemplify Recommendation 1 from the SEND guidance around creating a positive and supportive environment for all pupils without exception. The case study today is around a girl who is on the autism spectrum. She has a range of social and emotional learning needs. She's really struggled with her behavior in the past. And at the moment, she's also undergoing some health concerns, which have kept her out of school quite a bit. And when she does come into school, she can be quite tired and she can fall asleep in class. But we have really sought to develop positive relationships with her. Every morning when she arrives at school, she's greeted on the playground like everyone else by a member of our senior leadership team. If she's struggling that day, they walk her straight to class where we support her transition into the classroom and get her prepared for the day. The environment is in itself designed to be supportive. She has her own space, as does every child, where they have personalized tools, which you can see in the picture here of her desk. We also have a shared safe space where any child can go to take a break and where she often goes just to maybe take a minute to unwind or to have a little rest if she needs it. We make sure that we are really embedding SEL within our day. So we have multiple opportunities to ask the children how they're feeling and to give them time to practice using calming tools. We also make sure that focusing on positives is part of our routine. We set goals and then we celebrate when we achieve them each week. We also reflect on the week and what's gone really well. We take the time to maybe talk through things that didn't go well, and we always look forward to what's ahead and what's coming next. All of this has created a really positive outlook for this child, and she's become very engaged with her peers and staff, and she really is looking forward to doing well. All of this is really complemented by our proactive and positive approach to behavior. At the beginning of the year, we sat down with her and we mapped out a positive behavior support where she decided what her rewards would be for positive behavior. She also gave herself some sanctions, and all of this really fits back with her being able to identify what her emotions are and what she really needs at any point of the day. And we found it really avoids any of the negative behaviors, and she hasn't had a single sanction this year because she's really become invested in all the achievements that she's making. All of this means that she's able to engage in teaching and learning, and she's been able to access really effective teaching. We use Chromebooks, and so she's able to have lots of supportive prompts made available to her that way. I can personalize what her learning looks like. We can use a lot of visuals, and also here you can see I will put in like some metacognitive strategies that she can use to support perhaps her writing and a range of other skills. But all of this means that we've really been able to break down a lot of those barriers that we were seeing in the past, and just ensuring that she is achieving her absolute best.
Okay, apologies about the feedback on that. But as you can see, we do a lot of work with individual pupils, which are personalised to their needs, and really to fundamentally grow their passion and their excitement over being in school, over learning and accessing their education, so that they can develop both their learning skills and learning behaviours alongside the academic skills that they'll need to be successful in the future. Which brings us on to the second recommendation about how you really build those ongoing understanding of your pupils and their needs. And Sarah put this out on one of the Senko groups that she's part of, and you can see there the word cloud that they generated over how they go about building that ongoing understanding of their pupils and their needs. Meetings obviously being one of the key ones, and that could be with the parents or with the pupils or both, as well as other professionals. And time as well is one of those kind of key words there that's come up a bit larger than some of the others. And really that's what Laura was talking about in the video that we've just played, really taking the time to get to know our pupils, what they need, how they need to be supported, and then actually following through with that. And that's right from SLT in the morning when they greet her, coming through the door, to all of the staff who work with her throughout her school day, in her lessons and in her interventions. So I've also worked on the improving behaviour in schools guidance, and Phil Brown, who was a colleague who I worked with, he's a secondary deputy head or assistant head up in Blackpool, and we talked a lot about how we can really build those relationships with our pupils and gain a real understanding from them. And one of the ways that he does this within his school is by using this, which is the spiral of inquiry. And it's an inquiry orientated, evidence-based approach to teaching and learning. And it focuses on making sure that all of our systems that we put into place are more equitable for all of our learners. And as you can see, because it's a spiral, it's continually flowing and continually being revisited. It's not something to do as a one-off and then you leave it. And particularly for those pupils with SEND or who you're finding aren't able to access their learning and their education as well as perhaps others within your setting, this might be one way that you can find out about what really is happening for that individual, and then by trialing or looking at some research and thinking about some different strategies that you can use, can we improve it for that young person? And then you can see once you've taken that action, you check, have we made enough of a difference? And then it begins again. Okay, so now we've done that, right, what's going on now? And it just continues to build and build and build. So that's called the spiral of inquiry. If you Google it, you can find some more information about it by Julie Halbert and Linda Kaiser there. So that's one way that you could find out that information about your pupils. Another way which he pointed me in the direction of is something called PASS, and they use PASS with all of their pupils, but they also use it for their transition between year 6 and 7. This is something you buy in. And you get the pupils to answer a whole load of questions on that survey related to their feelings around school, their learning capacity, their confidence, their attitudes to attendance, their responses to the curriculum. And you can see from that example there that it gives them a score. And then it will point you in the direction of where the score isn't as high as you'd like it to be, some interventions or some strategies to use for that young person to improve it. So again, that's something that you can buy in as a school to help develop and understand those pupils if you wanted a kind of more formal way of doing it. Here at Billesley, we really try and build relationships with all of our pupils, and that's from every member of staff. The expectation is we all say hello to all of our pupils as they come in, and that's right from SL2 who are out on the playground to teaching staff on the door and teaching assistants and other support staff who are working in the classroom. And we also use more informal methods, so something like the 2 to 10 method, where you spend 2 minutes a day for 10 days talking to a pupil about something that is not school related or not academic related, to really try and build up a relationship or an understanding with them, so that you've got some other things to talk about, but also to build that relationship, so in the hope that they can then start to actually speak to you about things if they're not going well for them in the classroom. So that's the first and second recommendation. The third recommendation is a little bit chunkier, and this is about how we ensure pupils have access to high quality teaching. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, the 5 strategies here and the recommendations all have strong evidence for their effectiveness for teaching children with SEND, but they are not a magic bullet. They aren't here to solve the problem, and as soon as you put one of them in place, everything will be okay. It's about using them as strategies within your teachers' toolkits to help support all of your staff with working with pupils with SEND, and giving everybody really lots of different strategies that they can pull upon and adapt within their setting to help them to really thrive within school. So we're going to have a look at these 5 suggestions. The first one being the flexible grouping, and this really is the key to whenever you're thinking about working with children with SEND. And again, I refer back to what Laura said when she was speaking about our pupil in school. It's about the flexibility both with an individual, but the way that you group those individuals and how they're working, who they're working with, and what those learning barriers are, and how they can be kind of knocked down, if you like. How can we move pupils around in different lessons, within different parts of the lesson, to ensure that they understand what we're trying to teach, we understand what they're struggling with, and they're given the support to be successful. So when you're thinking about your grouping in a classroom, or you're thinking about looking at how your teachers are using support staff or setting up their classrooms or their groups, are they static kind of traditional groups that we might have seen a couple of years ago in schools, or are they flexible and really reflecting the needs of the learners within that classroom? And again, particularly thinking at the moment, I know that we've gone into everybody teaching their own class all day, whereas before we had certain children going and more of a setting approach for different subjects. This has been something that as a staff we've really worked on, because we've got our whole class with a massive range of needs, and working within a massive range of kind of year groups and curriculum. How do we manage that across our whole school day? And flexible grouping really is the key to that. The second strategy that's suggested is around metacognition. Now, we run lots and lots of webinars around metacognition, so I'd put you in the direction really of one of those if you'd like to find out some more, or you can download again the EEF guidance report around metacognition. But this really has shown to be effective in improving children's attainment, both SEND pupils and pupils without SEND. But it relies upon your teaching staff and your support staff really gaining the professional understanding and skills to develop a metacognitive knowledge for their pupils. And once your staff have that, they can then begin to explicitly teach some strategies, including for pupils how to plan and monitor and evaluate their own learning. Their staff can model their own thinking, and this helps pupils develop their own cognitive skills. And again, it works within that flexible grouping and enabling setting of appropriate challenges. And this develops people's self-regulation and their metacognitive skills. So I'd really recommend that you have a look at the metacognition report for a bit more on that. So the next strategy is around explicit instruction. And this isn't just simply lecturing or telling pupils what to do, but it does begin with quite a high level of teacher explanation or modelling, and then that extensive practice. And we find with our pupils with SEND, particularly those who are really finding things difficult, that actually that extensive practice and routine exercises not only begins to embed new knowledge, but also builds their confidence, which helps them to engage further in lessons and then allows you to develop those skills further. So it involves teaching those skills and concepts in really, really small steps, and then using examples and sometimes non-examples, so that you're really sure that children understand what they should be doing, and the things that perhaps they've been doing that aren't correct. So, for example, if you're doing an edit in your writing, you might have be modelling putting in a capital letter and put a capital letter in the wrong place, and see if they can spot that, and then go back and explicitly model, oh no, actually, okay, we only put a capital letter to begin a sentence or for a name or a place, using really clear and ambiguous language. It kind of speaks for itself, really, and then anticipating any common misconceptions and planning for that. And that's kind of really the key. How are you thinking ahead to your next lesson or your the next skill set that you're teaching, and where do you think your pupils are going to make those mistakes? And then highlighting any essential content and removing that distracting information. And we're going to have a look at technology, I think, next. And that's been a real positive for us, particularly in terms of removing any distracting information for our pupils, so that when we're presenting on our Google Slides for our lessons, we ensure that we don't have too many things on the screen as we're teaching, but also when we're presenting our work to children, is it that the performer that they're working on, is it accessible for them, and technology can really help with that. So that's around explicit instruction there. And the next bit, I'm going to hopefully play you another video. So this is from one of our pupils who actually started with me in the resource base, and is now full-time in our Year 6 mainstream class, and is looking to go to mainstream secondary in September next year. And technology really has been an unlocking for education for lots of our pupils within our resource base. So I'm going to leave him to talk to you a little bit about why he likes using technology and how it's supported him in his lessons. Hopefully there'll be no feedback on this one.
I really like using the computer because it has the internet and you can look up or search up anything. And I really and my teacher can edit my work or highlight my work to edit my work to make sure my mistakes, and it's color coded. And I like it when my teacher can separate my questions for maths on Google Slides, but in writing, instead of just writing all of the words in a book, it's really quick to write. It's really easy to type on a computer, and it's easy to read off the questions on maths. Having a computer is so cool and fun.
Okay, so you can see there that he talks about using it in both English and maths. We also use tech for our reading lessons as well. And we use it in a really wide range of ways. But what we found really helpful is using the Read and Write app, which is a Google app, and allows you to drop in symbols to help you support with vocabulary. It also allows pupils to listen to what you've put onto your Google Slides so that they don't have to read it. And it gives you definitions as well if your pupils need that. The young man there also talks about using it in maths, and we found that actually supporting pupils by having one question per slide has really helped. Also by setting out boxes so that they know the things like column addition, where to put the different digits. And in reading, we use Google Forms for children to complete their comprehension activities, which allows us to give immediate feedback through marking it like a quiz. It also means that pupils can have a multiple choice element if we need them to, as well as being able to break down the text into chunks so that children specifically know they're looking in that paragraph and it's just an image of the paragraph they need to find out what that information is. So technology really can be a great support for pupils with SEND. Okay, sorry. So the next bit is about scaffolding. And here are some examples of some scaffolding that we use within our school. So we've got our now a next board or a task board there where you can see that the pupils got their own part of the timetable so that they know exactly what's happening before play. We've also got a copy of a task board for one of our maths lessons, and they follow quite a formulaic approach with some explicit instruction within that. But you can see that at the top, he's got the option to choose what equipment he'll need. Then it's the next step, and then there's the idea weight that he ticks it off when he's completed. And then it goes through the expectations of all the different parts of the lesson, including some prompts during the teacher input about the expected learning behaviours as well. So next we've got a video. This is from Steph. She's one of our year 2 teachers, talking you through how one of these is used in her classroom for one of our pupils there.
So this is the pupils area. This is now a next board, so he knows what lesson we're doing now and what he'll be doing next. And then here we use his task board to show what activity or what task he's doing. We move his picture down to show what he's expected to do at each different part of the lesson. And once he's completed all 3 things and they're ticked off, he can get his reward.
You can see she was thrilled at me asking her to be recorded there. But it can, again, be used in a really wide range of ways. And looking back at flexible grouping, it might be that one pupil actually just needs these things for, for one of the lessons. It might be just that they need a task board for maths or just for writing. So that flexibility again really can help support our pupils in being successful. Okay, and I'm going to pass back to Sarah to finish off with the 4th and 5th recommendations.
Okay, thanks. So we're going to look at recommendation 4 here, which is where we complement high quality teaching with carefully selected small group and one-to-one interventions. So obviously this, at this moment in time, is a difficult thing. So we're obviously dealing with COVID as well, and we're dealing with bubbles. So all that needs to be taken in consideration when we look at this, because we can't be as flexible as we previously have been. First of all, I want to direct you to the EEF guidance. So there is an EEF guidance which is making the best use of TAs, which is really useful and helpful when we're looking at recommendation 4 and 5. And also on the EEF website, there is lots of information about effective interventions that they've trialled, and the research is there to back up whether they are effective, and the number of months progress you make, and also the value for money. So I would really recommend looking at those as well. Now, to explain recommendation 4, I'm going to show a video, which is actually an EEF video, which really talks about how high quality teaching remains central to everything we do, and interventions need to fit really precisely to support those children that need it, but they should be evidence-based. We shouldn't just be using them for the sake of it. And through all of that, we need to ensure that there's the communication between the actual intervention and that high quality teaching, so that the teacher, the TA, are continually talking about the child and those gaps of learning that we're trying to close. So we're going to have a look at this video, and then I'll talk a little bit further.
Many schools choose to make delivering structured interventions part of a TA's job. Recommendations 5 and 6 give us very clear guidance here over what works.
Recommendations 5 and 6 relate to using TAs to deliver high quality structured interventions. It will typically involve a teaching assistant delivering short, well structured, snappy one-to-one or small group sessions for pupils that are typically struggling with their numeracy and literacy. The teaching assistants will be trained quite extensively, so there'll be 5, 10 hours of training, and then some follow-up and support. They'll typically have quite a lot of structured resources, so there'll be lesson plans, there'll be additional materials, there'll be exercises wrapped up with them. And what we found is when we've tested the impact of those interventions compared to business as usual, we're seeing the pupils typically making about 3 to 4 additional months progress on the back of that. What's interesting is when you look at what business as usual is, it's not no interventions going on. So schools are doing interventions, they're using TAs to deliver interventions, but it's really coming down to the quality and the training and the specificity of what's going on in those interventions. So these are well timetabled, there'll be 2 or 3 times a week, they'll be well structured, because they're often very brief, that there'll be 15, 20 minutes. You've got to be very well organised to get the materials across, and because they're very brief, the pupils are not really missing too much of lessons. So you can do them, at the end of lessons. Sometimes they do them after school or in registration or break, so it's really coming down to not whether you do interventions, but how you do them.
So Diane, we've heard from Dr. Jonathan Sharples about the research around structured interventions. What can you tell us about what that looks like in practice?
Thinking about 2 types of interventions. So the first type may be interventions that the schools have designed themselves because their children need a particular intervention. So it may be that they have a lot of children new to English, or it may be that they've identified a particular gap in a particular subject and they've designed an intervention for themselves. Where that's done well, the teaching assistant is trained well for that, and that intervention is monitored and evaluated rigorously to show that it does have an impact. Where it's an intervention that is tried and tested and recommended by the EF, that involves high quality training for the teaching assistant. It involves a regular building into the timetable, so regular intervention, short, sharp bursts, and again, evaluated for impact.
Why does evaluation matter so much when it comes to how structured interventions are used?
If an intervention is going to take place on a regular basis, that demands a high percentage of a teaching assistant's time and the children's time. So we have to demonstrate that that has an impact. This must not and can't be about a teaching assistant taking a group of children out and just keeping them busy, or keeping them occupied, or just practicing a skill over and over again. So we have to demonstrate that the children are learning and they making the next steps of development. It's having an impact.
Perhaps the key message here is that structured interventions delivered by TAs work, but that they need to be high quality and ideally evidence-based. In the rest of this unit, we'll look at these ideas in more detail. But for now, let me leave you with a question. What are you already doing to monitor the impact of your interventions, and what else could you be doing moving forwards?
Yeah, go to the next slide. Thanks. Okay, so just coming back to that, so what are you already doing to monitor the impact of interventions, and what else could you be doing going forward? That's where we're coming back to that, using the evidence-based approach, and using that knowledge that we've got there from research, putting it together with the practitioner's knowledge, and then implementing and then reflecting, doing that continuous process. Now, some of the things I sent out in the resource pack is there's a TA RAG self-assessment resource and also an intervention health check. And I think these are really important things to do as SENCOs or as senior leaders talking with SENCOs and inclusion leads, to make sure that those interventions that we're inputting and the children are having are vital, and there are pre and post assessments, and we're always discussing about what are the impacts for those children, what progress can we see. So we're just going to move on to recommendation 5, and just to clear up, when the gentleman said in that video recommendation 6 and 7, he was referring to the making the best use of TA EF, but it is a crossover here. It's just to clarify that. Okay, so our final recommendation is working effectively with TAs. And I've taken these 4 recommendations here from the guidance from making the best use of TAs. And we're just going to have a little reflection on that. One of the other things I've put in the resource pack for you is there's a TA observation sheet, and I really like this TA observation sheet. So what it does, and you can do that in COVID times, hopefully, if your school allows it, is it allows you to observe for 15 minutes, and I've done this through a window, to watch a TA and actually see everything they do in those 15 minutes. And it's a really good tick sheet. And I really recommend you do it on a couple of teaching assistants, just to get an idea of what is the ethos for your teaching assistants when they're in those classrooms, what's the natural things that occur, and what are the really good things you see. So it just helps you look at observations in a different way, and I quite enjoyed that. I thought that was a different approach. So what's really useful is if we understand the impact of an ineffective approach before attempting to introduce the evidence-based one. So I put a slide up here just to help to clarify that. There's been a series of studies about TAs, and they found that the majority of TAs spent most of their time working in small groups or one-to-one. Okay, and as a result, a high level of TA support pupils with the most complex needs spent less time in their whole class teaching. And we often talk about this. As a school, we pick a child and we look at their day at school. So we take ourselves and put ourselves into the shoes of a pupil, perhaps in year 5, whether we're looking at white British boys or different diversities, but we look at that child and their day and we analyse what they're getting from our school. And often some of those children we send are spending a lot of time outside the classroom, and it's going back to actually that high quality teacher is the most important part for those children. And what is the impact of those interventions on them? Is it worth them being out the classroom, missing out from being with their peers? And also then what we do is we have that conversation with the child, and things come up which I think is really informative, like I don't like missing assembly, and then we think about the benefits of assembly for that child. And again, going back to that initial diagram I talked at the beginning, it's talking about that child as an individual and supporting them and what their personality needs to succeed. The next slide is a really useful one, Siobhan. Sorry, Siobhan's answering the chat. The next one is a really useful one, and I've tried to put an example on here so you can get this in the EF guidance, and I've just simply put on a really simple question there, 24 times 4, okay, just to help us. So when we're talking with TAs and talking about how we can have a positive impact on supporting our pupils, I think this practical framework is really useful. So initially we'd say to the TAs, self-scaffolding, which is where you observe the pupils working independently, you don't interfere. Then the next step is that prompting, where you're giving them 10 seconds to think about it, but you might use a prompt question. And at Bilsey, we've done a lot of work on actual questioning and how to support teachers with appropriate questioning in the classroom. So for example, the prompt here is, can you remember your 4 times tables? Then we go on to cluing, where the TA uses a statement to support. So it might be, in this example, they help to count up in 4s. So 4, 8, 12, 16. And then let's say there's still the child stuck, then we're going to go on to modelling. I've used a really simple example here just to try and really help. So at this point, the TA might demonstrate the next step of 4 times 4. And then they'd ask the child, can you do 2 times 4? So we're helping to break it down. And I think that scaffolding framework really helps to break it down. But I do think it's important that there's an example there for TAs to go back. And one of the things I do with our TAs, if we were looking at this in an inset, is that I'd give them a number of scenarios to say, right, how do we break this down? How do we use this scaffolding framework to be successful? So we're going to help our pupils to be as independent as possible. Okay, so that's the end of the recommendations. So it's really about what's next. There's a lot of information in that guidance, and some of you will have read the guidance and some of you will be looking at it for the first time now. Hopefully the resources we've sent to you will help with next steps. But also Siobhan and I would recommend looking at some of the other EEF guidance to just get, because they do overlap and there's lots of information there to support. And then, so that's my recommendations. Siobhan, should I pass them to you? Or? Oh yes, and the other thing we can look at is the guidance for implementation. And in that there are implementation plans, and this might be where you'd sit down as a leadership team or as an inclusion team and talk about where your next steps will be. And there's lots of information I could talk about the implementation plan, but I really recommend you look at that and start at what the problems are and what your goals are, and then go into the middle to how you're going to get there. Okay. Now, has anybody got any questions in the chat? Anything they want to feedback? You picked up any? Okay. We've got some questions about phonics interventions. What I will do for that is I'll send that out with some information later. I think that's probably best, just to make sure to get that answer completely correct. I think any recommendations for structured phonics interventions being used. Now, we do use structured phonics interventions, but we change them to suit our individual needs as well. So what I'll do is I'll get the ones that we use and how we change it and get a bit more information to support there. But has anybody else got any questions or any feedback just quickly to pop in there to make sure that Siobhan and I have covered everything for yourselves?